Today, I thought I'd talk about the hero's journey as kind of an organizing principle in memoir writing. And there are a lot of different types of stories in memoir, and some people can disparage the hero's journey, but I think it's because they don't really understand, or yeah, they don't understand what a beautiful tool this can be for thinking about organizing any story, but particularly a story of your life. And I think that a lot of people think of the hero's journey. They think of Star Wars. They think of action, Indiana Jones. But the hero's journey is applicable in a lot more subtle ways, and it doesn't need to apply to a very adventurous story. It's in fact, it is sort of a meta story. It is the story of stories. And I don't know if any of y'all understand or have read much about the hero's journey. I invite you to do a little research about it. But it was, it's kind of an archetypal model for a story, and it runs through various and it's used often in screenwriting to a fault. And there's lots of stuff out there with methods in which you apply very specific aspects of the hero's journey, and you almost write to each specific aspect. And I don't advocate that. I mean, some of the aspects of the hero's journey, it's the call to action, oftentimes maybe a rejection of the call to action first, then crossing a threshold, seizing the adventure, on and on to eventually entering a dark cave, then finding a resolution, and then bringing that information back home. Again, there's very specific kind of applications of the hero's journey. I think of it less specifically and more about again, sort of the story of all stories. So the hero's journey is really about two different worlds. And if you think about your own story, your story will begin in what I would call the ordinary world. And it's the status quo. It's your life that you've been living when something happened that changed everything. And this something happened that changed everything, asked of you to go on this journey and to cross a threshold, and eventually you enter what then I would call the extraordinary world. And after you enter the extraordinary world, you face a lot of challenges. You face a lot of adversity. In some ways, the hero's journey is really just a story about adversity and overcoming it and learning lessons and then applying those lessons to the future. And eventually, the action heightens and the intensity heightens, the stakes get higher and higher until you come to some, we talk about a crisis and climax, at which point, you really face the dragon of your life. And often that dragon might appear to be in the external world, but if you take a closer look at it, you eventually realize that it's really something in your internal world. It's something that perhaps you are afraid of. Perhaps it's something like your own pride and self-assurity. Maybe it's your addiction and your habit of running away from things that was and the pain underneath that was fueling the addiction. But anyway, you kind of get to this heightened state, and then you cross over and you realize you've got to integrate this stuff. You've got to integrate all this adventure you've been on, all this adversity you faced, all these realizations you've made, and you've got to process it and then bring it back home, where then you re-enter the ordinary world. And so, as you can see, that's a self-organizing, a program. It's a way to, it's the typical 3-act structure of many literary works. And when I say 3 acts, it doesn't mean that for you it doesn't turn into 5, but there's always a way that, or 6 or 4, but there's always a way that there's sort of this ordinary world, extraordinary world, and a return to the ordinary world with the wisdom you have to share with the world. So, but the idea that's central to this is sort of the idea of being tested. And so if you do some research into the hero's journey, I think the thing that I think that I hold on to most is that there's just a pattern of being tested by life, and then having to make an adjustment, having a realization first, then having to make an adjustment in your life, and then you take that forward. So we've talked a little bit, some of you have read my book. In my book, there's at the beginning, the call to action is sort of talking to John Krakauer and realizing that I really wanted to be an adventure writer, and that sent me on this journey. But then I faced new adversity because the depression kept returning, and so now I'm an adventure writer, and I'm dealing with the adversity of dealing with deep depressions. Well, that leads to over medications, and so then I'm dealing with adventure, medication, and depression, until eventually the adventure drops away and I realize I've got to fix my life. And so there's just a way that each realization keeps fueling the action forward. And realizations don't always have to be positive. It's not, a realization is essentially bringing something that's unconscious about how you've been living to consciousness, and then you have more information to live with and to make decisions from. But sometimes that realization can be a realization that I'm on a downswing, I'm going down, and unless something changes fast, I'm going to keep going down, and I hope I don't go down so far that I can't pull myself back up. That's a realization, even though it's sort of cast in a bit of a negative valence. So one other thing to talk about the hero's journey, we talk about there's something called meeting a mentor in the hero's journey, and that happens fairly early in the process. In a good memoir, you can have external mentors that arrive to teach you things, but really, I think that the mentor of all mentors in your story, in your memoir, is yourself. And so again, this idea that you go through something, you meditate on it in the end, and something comes up for you that's that you teach, the event itself taught you something about yourself, and again that then you try to integrate in yourself to move forward. And in this way, your memoir will start to really function causally. And to circle back to the fact that the hero's journey it's something that exists in the ether. It's something that exists in your brain. It's life is a complicated thing. It's like ups and downs. It's not necessarily organized, but it's when we apply a story to it, when we see our lives from a retrospective place, apply a lesson learned and apply that forward into your life, that it starts to take shape. And so just, I guess my point there is being conscious of the fact that whenever we tell a story, we are moving into the realm of creative writing. I hesitate to use the word fiction because we're trying to write honestly and speaking in facts as much as possible, but there's a way that we are fictionalizing our life merely by telling it into a story. And I think the more you keep that up in the air, up in your own consciousness, because I think as we talked about, a memoir, two of the main purposes of a memoir are to entertain, even if it's a hard, difficult story. Or we're writing, we want people to get to the end, and to even if it's hard, to enjoy this piece of art. But we're also educating, and we're trying to give people a little bit of a roadmap of how you face the challenges of your life, how you slayed your dragons, because your readers are going to be people that are there for a reason, because they identify with what you're going through and maybe the topics you're covering. So just to reemphasize, you are the mentor of your dreams. You are the mentor that you keep consulting. And when I write, I often, take advantage of, the idea of the unconscious or a part of me. I'll often say, like, as I move forward with my life, there was a small part of me that knew I was a broken man and I would have to go through many journeys many trials and tribulations before I would write my life, or the opposite. There was a small part of me that knew that I was now on a good track, even if my life itself didn't show that. So I invite you to play with that part of you. It's a popular idea. It's an idea in psychology that we're made up of parts, and so it just use that to your advantage to allow yourself to, as Walt Whitman said, we contain multitudes, and so lean on different parts that might have different wisdom for you if that works for you. So that's my quick talk about the hero's journey. It leads us in the future to talk about a 3-act structure, but it really is, again, I love the term self-organizing, because when you tell stories and when you lean into this ordinary world, extraordinary world, return to the ordinary world, it starts to organize your book for you. And so I'll pause there, and maybe if there's some questions before we